It was 2 weeks before the state football playoff game. Anticipation was pulsing throughout my body. I'd been building up to this moment since my sophomore year. And as a senior starter on both offense and defense, there was a lot of pressure upon me, upon my team to win for our community and for our school. This is me, number 4 up there. But even with that pressure, I was having a great senior year, filled with school activities, friends, and sports. I felt like I was on top of the world, with my future shining brightly before me. I felt invincible, immortal, a teenage boy waiting for the world, with the world there ready to conquer. But then in almost an instant, the world, as I knew it, came crashing down. At the height of my perceived invincibility, my girlfriend, Jeanette, this is a picture of her and I in high school, pulled me off to the side between classes, whispered to me that she might be pregnant. That moment is forever etched into my memory. It's just like in the movies when everything freezes and that camera focuses right in on the shocked subject's face. I was that subject with that shocked face. My world suddenly became very small. After recovering from what felt like a wrecking ball slamming into me, I chose denial. I didn't have time for this. I had a big game coming up. As a 17-year-old, pretty immature boy, I didn't have time for the consequences of my choices. But guess what? Those consequences came anyway. We are all going to have to deal with consequences within our lives. Consequences from our own choices, consequences from choices of others, and consequences from the circumstances of life that we have no control over. My question today to you is, how can we take those cons out of consequences and replace them with pros? Prosequences. Prosequences, kind of a hard word to say. I'm sure you're all going to go home and say it a few times tonight. It's probably why it's not part of our vocabulary, but it really should be. When we use the word consequence, it's usually used in a negative way. For example, the outcomes of that situation has consequences. Why can't we flip that and say the outcome of that situation has prosequences? Let's change our thinking from consequences to prosequences, cons to pros, negatives to positives. That's exactly what those two 17-year-olds had to learn how to do. This was a scandal of epic proportions in this small Utah town. We were good kids. Jeanette, a talented basketball player with aspirations to play college basketball. Me, the student body vice president with goals to serve a mission for my church soon after graduation. We had to learn to take those consequences that were coming at us pretty hard and switch those into prosequences. We had some tough decisions and choices coming our way. First of all, we could get married and give up those dreams and aspirations that we had. Or second, we could put the child up for adoption, temporarily delaying those dreams, but not being able to raise our own child. Two tough decisions with some pretty tough consequences. Well, we decided to get married. We decided that we were going to raise this child. We decided that we were going to be a part of her life. She became our new dream. She became the ultimate prosequence. Now, it wasn't easy. I can't even begin to describe the hardships and challenges that we faced. Think about it. Think of the 17-year-olds that you know, or think about yourself when you were 17. I look back and think of that. It blows my mind, the responsibilities that were thrust upon us. All the statistics stacked against us. Teenage pregnancy, teenage marriage, 2 teenagers, the new baby on their way, no money, and all our dreams redirected. We had to change those consequences into prosequences. So how did we do that? Well, first of all, we had to figure out what our options were. The consequences were coming now. Those options were limited, but they were there. So we did that. We talked about those options that we had. Second of all, we had to learn to let go of the things that were out of our control. That is so easy to say and very difficult to do. We had to let go of those dreams and aspirations that not only we had for ourselves, but that our parents had for us. We had to let go of relationships that we couldn't have anymore. But once we were able to do these things, and with the help of others, we were able to set up a new plan. We had a vision in mind of what we could become. So we set that path towards that vision. And then, most importantly, as we headed down that path, we had to learn to adapt, but yet stay focused. Guess what? As you go down that path, more choices and more consequences are going to come. You have to do this process over, adapt, adjust, but yet stay focused on what you want to become. I got very lucky. I couldn't have partnered with somebody who was more perfect for me. And Jeanette and I have been married for almost 30 years this year. We have 5 incredible kids, 2 awesome in-laws that have joined this crazy family, and as of 2 weeks ago, 4 beautiful granddaughters. This is the ultimate prosequence from some very poor decisions and consequences 30 years ago. Now, don't get me wrong. This hasn't been a perfect marriage or a perfect family life by any means. And my wife and my kids would be the first to come up and tell you that. We haven't always made great choices, or good choices for that matter. But guess what? Throughout the years, we've learned to refine this process of taking the cons out of consequences and replace them with pros. In fact, it's become less of a process and a more of an attitude or a way of life. Taking those cons and flipping them into pros. What a great way to live life. You can do that within your relationships, you can do that at work, and everything that you come in contact with, because you're going to have consequences that come your way. Look for the pros in those consequences. In fact, just a few years down the road, we had another big choice coming our way that had some consequences. It was the choice of uprooting our family, moving them across country, and continuing our education and going to dental school. Some of you might say, what's the big deal with that? That sounds like a great choice. What consequences come with that? Well, there are a lot of consequences. In fact, there was a very large financial consequence, leaving a well-paying job that was consistent and going hundreds of thousands of dollars into debt. But Jeanette and I decided through this process that we were going to turn that large financial consequence into a prosequence. First of all, we didn't call it going into debt. We called it an investment into our future. That was the prosequence. An investment into a profession that would allow us to eventually become financially stable. An investment into a profession that would allow us to actually serve others and give back, which is exactly what we did. As we not only served within my practice and with my employees or in the community, but also as we helped form a nonprofit organization where we helped take those services around the world, which has been very rewarding for me and my family and anybody that comes in contact with me. So be careful. If you talk to me about it, I'm going to recruit you. So what happens when the consequences come at us from life circumstances? Circumstances that are out of our control. I first met Otagu 10 years ago in Dara, Ethiopia. The nonprofit organization that we'd helped found was focusing its service in Otagu's village. Otagu was an orphan. And like so many orphans in Ethiopia, he had been taken in by some distant relatives. He had to learn at a very young age to work for everything that he had. As a 10-year-old boy, Otagu became our protector, our translator, and our tour guide. In fact, on our first visit to Dara, he took us not only on a tour of the village, to the market where he protected us from the challenges in an actual market. This was not a market where white people usually were at. And he took us on a tour to his home, his living quarters, and even showed us his room, which, as you can see, was more of a closet or a shed, separate from the main living quarters. He wore the same clothes the entire week, which included a pair of broken down flip-flops. His hands were calloused because of the work that he had to do. We could tell that the relatives that took Otagu in loved him, but they could barely provide for the needs of their own, let alone the needs of somebody else. Jeanette and I were heartbroken for Otagu and the circumstances that he was in. Otagu was always the first one to meet us when we arrived in Dara. This is one of my favorite pictures of Otagu and me. I think he's about as tall as me now. If you remember back to that first photo, he was about this tall. And this is a photo that I have on my desk at work. Otagu took advantage of the opportunities that came his way every time we came into the village. In fact, we were able to hire him as a translator in our clinics, in their dental clinic and the eye clinic, even with his limited English speaking abilities. And even though he spoke broken English, he also spoke Amharic, which is the national language, and he spoke Oromic, which is more of the regional language, which was a very valuable skill to have. Over time, he became a leader within our group, especially with the teenagers. And as our group grew in size and purpose and traveled to other villages, Otagu took advantage of those opportunities as well to learn to serve and to grow as well. In fact, we even took him to the capital, Addis Ababa, where he had his first experience staying in a hotel and his first encounter with the shower. And the waterlogged bathroom was proof of that. I wish I had a picture of that. Jeanette and I fell in love with Otagu. He was a pretty special boy. In fact, we even looked at ways into bringing him to America and making him a permanent part of our family. But we soon came to realize that the best thing for Otagu was not pulling him away from his people and from his culture, but giving him encouragement and support within his own country where he could learn to be a leader and a positive force. And that's exactly what we did. So how did Otagu take the consequences of his life circumstances and flip those in to prosequences? Well, first of all, he had to figure out what his options were as well. And because of those consequences, his options were pretty limited, but they were there, and he had options. Second of all, with the help of others, he had to define a plan. He had told us from day one that he wanted to graduate from high school, which was a very hard thing to do in his village, and second, to attend the university in Addis Ababa, which was very rare for somebody from his village to do. So he set that plan up. With the networking of help that he built over the years, he stayed focused on that plan and had to learn to adapt. In fact, when he graduated from high school a couple years ago, he couldn't directly go to the university or go to school. He had to work and earn money, and then he went to the local kind of a type of community college school in a city near his village. This is Otagu today, healthy, happy, taller than me, good-looking boy, and attending the university in Addis Ababa. Otagu did not let the consequences of his life circumstances define the path that he had to take. Just like those two 17-year-olds 30 years ago did not let those harsh consequences from some pretty poor choices define who they were going to be or the path that they were going to take. We all have consequences. We're going to have consequences tonight from choices we make. Tomorrow, next week. We're going to have consequences from the choices of others. Consequences are going to come to us from the circumstances of life that we have no control over. Don't let those consequences define who you are. Don't let those consequences guide you down the path. take those consequences and flip those into prosequences. Thank you.